very happy to welcome you to this session, which is entitled How to Choose a Water Quality Field Test Kit. And this is a collaboration across WHO, CAWST and UNICEF. And I'm very happy to have two colleagues right in front of me here, Camille Zimmer from CAWST and Rick Johnson from WHO, who will be jumping in and presenting different bits which I'm coming on to. But the session objectives this morning are about really considering the challenges with choosing a field test kit. And in so many sessions this week we heard on the island about the importance of an important role that field test kit monitoring is playing in different parts of the world for different parameters. We'll also be raising awareness of an independent lab evaluation of 20 microbial testing products, and finally raising awareness of a suite of helpful tools and resources to support field test kit selection as you move forward and are choosing the best option for you. But we're going to have just really quick activity here to get us going. It's a really tight session, so we don't have as much time for interactive kind of dialogue as we'd hoped. But yeah, you know, you're there, you're sitting in your program when you go home, when you fly out of UNC, and after you spend 16 hours getting back on top of your emails, and then you've got you know, the last email in your inbox is about choosing your kit. So, you know, you've got a tough choice. There's all these manufacturers chasing you after UNC. You've got their free pens, and now you want to know, what do you do? What do you actually need to know to get this best product for your need? And your need may be not the same as the person next to you. So how do you do this? How do you decide between so many options? So I want you to take 1 minute to think of two questions you feel would be kind of two criteria you feel would need to be answered to select the right testing kit. Like obviously, an obvious one is to start with is what parameter you know you can test. So maybe we can just do this you know, just with kind of people just shouting out. Don't feel shy, just shout, because we've got so little time to get through this. But what do you think would be important criteria to kind of help you in your selection of your field test kit?
Whose job is it to test, and what's their incentives for doing it?
Great, thank you. Whose job it is to test? What are their incentives?
Cost to test.
Cost, thank you. Yes.
Inputs to test needs.
Sorry?
Inputs, energy, what does the test need to operate?
Excellent. Energy, what kind of resources and kind of setup do you need around you to run this?
User-friendliness?
User-friendliness. Rick?
From the last session, what's going to be done with the data?
What's going to be done? What purpose are you doing your monitoring for?
Reliable data.
Reliable data, maybe a reliable kit as well to get your reliable data.
How much waste is it generating? Where do I put it?
Yeah, great point. Yeah, what kind of impact are you having using that kit on the environment around you? Lars?
Enhanced availability of supplies.
Yes, yeah, your supply chain to keep your test kit going.
So the level of skill, or how easy is it to mess up and get wrong?
Skill set, there's other hands here.
The duration it takes to get the results.
Yeah.
Is there any consequence to anyone if the test isn't conducted?
Okay, so I think you touched on nearly all of these points, and which was pretty good in the space of about 2 minutes. You got it all. Maybe the only one was detection limits, distribution and availability, weight and portability. So a really great set of comments though coming from you. So you're all kind of seeing now the criteria and the the value of this session that we're trying to do. So basically what we're going to go through is Rick is going to go next and give us an overview of an independent lab evaluation of microbial testing products. Then Camille will jump in and give us a sneak preview of a guide to help this selection process. We'll hear some case studies, and then Camille will help us at the end with sharing some helpful tools that I think will answer some of the points that you've been raising. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Rick.
Thanks so much, Aidan. So I'm Rick Johnson, WHO, the WHO lead of the Joint Monitoring Program. And I want to share some results from an independent lab evaluation that WHO supported of 20 different microbial field testing products and methods. We will have time for some questions after this. This is a project that's been going on for a long time, so please, happy to talk about it more in the Q&A. I think in this audience, we don't need to justify why it's important to test microbial quality or the concept of indicator bacteria. Obviously, there are so many different pathogens, we can't test for them all. So we look for indicator bacteria or other indicators of fecal contamination, and the recommended fecal indicator bacteria by WHO is E. coli, which is a subset of fecal coliforms or thermal-tolerant coliforms, which is in turn a subset of total coliforms. So you might see any of those indicators being used for water quality testing. We would think of total coliforms as a good indicator of like process integrity if you have some treatment system in place, but not necessarily an indicator of fecal contamination. So we look more towards fecal coliforms, or ideally E. coli for fecal risk. Combined with the sanitary inspection to see, what risks might not be translating to microbial contamination at the time of the test. So there are lots of different testing products available, testing methods, and it can be really confusing and difficult to make a selection among a product. This definitely applies in a lab setting, but I think it applies even, there are more variables and more considerations if you're going to be trying to do that testing outside of a lab environment in the field. So we just discussed that there were a lot of different factors that could be considered. The purpose of this evaluation was to focus in on the accuracy and precision of different methods. So what we did is we worked with UNICEF on this over a multi-year program. Back in 2018, UNICEF had a program out of their supply division called a Technical Target Product Profile, a TPP, where they wanted to pull together a bunch of manufacturers of testing equipment to say, this is our ideal scenario. Do you have anything like it now, or could you maybe possibly work towards something like that now? And that led to a lot of bilateral discussions with different producers, both about products that exist and things that might be in the pipeline. That led us to shortlist 20 products that we were interested in assessing because we thought they had promise or were already being used, and we wanted to just make sure that they were performing in terms of accuracy and precision. We worked for a couple of years to develop a lab protocol from WHO and UNICEF, but also a technical advisory group. Some members of that have been at this conference. And then contracted an independent laboratory in the Netherlands, KWR, to record, compile, and analyze the data. We analyzed 20 different kits, some of them well-established, commercially available, some of them in development or even at a research stage still. And pretty much, well, exactly, half of them were based on counting colonies, either on a membrane or in some cases in a gel matrix. And the other half were based on suspension. And those suspension methods, most of them were either a presence-absence test or a statistical most probable number test, an MPN test. There was one innovative test here, Fluidian Alert Lab, which used the dynamics of growth of bacteria and an enzyme test to see when does exponential growth happen and to calibrate that against concentration. All of the others were based on a most probable number method. Several of them were marketed as presence-absence tests, but in order to assess them, we converted them into MPN methods by using, say, 96 well plates to make an MPN calculation. Most of them were for E. coli specific, but there were a few like Del Agua and Aquasafe that are more thermal-tolerant coliforms. And then we did look at the hydrogen sulfide test from half the screen. And we compared those trial methods, those candidates, to a standard method, a reference method, which was the IDEX quantitrace system. And we did a two-phase assessment. A first kind of screening, looking at laboratory E. coli, triplicate samples, clean waters, just to see, does this thing, more or less do what we would expect it to do? before then advancing to phase 2, where we did additional tests. We looked at false positive, false negatives, different natural waters, and used wild E. coli taken from a wastewater treatment plant effluent instead of a lab culture. So in the end, 8 products did not advance past phase 1. We found enough issues with them to not spend the additional time and resources to do the more detailed assessments. But then we did do this assessment on 12. The first thing we did was to look at these non-target organisms to see if we would get false positives on those. We also looked at target, we looked at those same stocks and said, well, if you would spike them with a little bit of E. coli, do you still get a positive result, or do the other bacteria overwhelm the signal? And then we did dilution series. Really, the main one was looking with wild E. coli in 5 different natural waters to look at different concentrations and different matrices. So some of the phase 2 results, first on the false positives and false negatives, we didn't find very many problems. There were a few tests that did yield slightly positive results for Aeromonas, so that could be of concern with those products. And then there was one test that didn't show E. coli when there was also a lot of Enterobacter or Klebsiella in the system. So some possible difficulties with, I guess, sensitivity in that product. But by and large, no big issues there. Then looking at the natural water experiments, we worked with, 3 groundwaters and 2 surface waters with a range of characteristics, looking at different pH, turbidity, and alkalinity levels, and did a dilution series, so we would spike them with wastewater and then dilute down to get 4 stocks in those 4 risk ranges, and then do triplicate samples on each of those. A lot of results to share, but some highlights are, one thing I wanted to say about that risk matching is we would try to see if the reference method and the trial method would result in the same risk classification. So if a test kit said 12 and the reference method said 23, we'd say that's both in the high risk category, so that would count as a match. And then we could look at the proportion of replicates that matched for the different categories and the different waters. And we found a few products that worked really well across all 5 different test waters. We found several products that worked quite well with some test waters, but not so well with others. So were less consistent, say. And then a few products, especially some emerging, not yet ready for commercial prime time, products that really didn't work well on any waters at all. Also, we found that some products advertised that you could incubate either at one set of temperatures and times or another, and there could be some differences by product for incubation conditions. And an unexpected finding was that we had a lot of problem reading some plates because of what we call smeared colonies. This only applied to the membrane filtration systems, but we found it in multiple different technologies. And what we think happened was that we were following the manufacturer instructions. For instance, the compact dry plates say add 1 milliliter of water to rehydrate the media. The WagTech and Delago kits say you should add 2 or 2.5 milliliters of media broth to the pads. And we think that's just too much liquid in some cases. So following that, we've done some action research to see the impact on hydration volumes. And this is work done by Christy Chatterley. I don't think she's here anymore at Fort Lewis. But with the same stock, we could see this smearing with the 1 mil recommended volume, even less, some smearing with 0.8 mils. But once you get to 0.7, 0.6, 0.5, 0.4 mils, you're getting good clean colonies without the smearing. So now when we use these tests, we're recommending a 0.6 mil volume. And I've spoken with some people who regularly use Delagua or WagTech kits, and they don't measure 2.5 mils. They say, well, we add enough so that it doesn't get too wet. So that is probably the good practice is don't follow the instructions. Do what seems best. So we've done the evaluation. We're putting the reports up on our website, and we do want to pull all the information from the different tests together in a synthesis report to make that publicly available to help people choose an appropriate product for their field testing needs. We have a website where those completed reports are already available, and that synthesis will be put up as soon as it's completed. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we do have a couple minutes for any questions or reactions to this part of the work. Go ahead.
Do I need a mic or do I just shout?
It'll pick you up here.
I think we're good.
Yeah, you're good
Oh
there.
yeah, so
Just
thanks a
loud.
lot for making these results available. I think it's very useful. If I'm not mistaken, UNICEF once also launched a challenge to have like more instant test kits to develop like parameters.
Yes.
Because our challenge in the field is that we need 2 visits to confirm a household that their water is dirty, and we're competing with TDS meters, which have like a pregnancy test
Yes.
or a COVID test that gives immediately some kind of results. And I know it's a bit beyond what you've been testing, but
No, it's very
could
much
you
related.
update a bit
Yeah.
on what your findings are with regard to those testing kits?
So that was
like
that target
parameters?
product profile thing I mentioned at the beginning, the TPP. In the end, that one innovative product, the Fluidian that I mentioned, does have a faster time to result of about 9 hours, depending on the concentration levels. But there's a trade-off in speed to time of result and a level of contamination. So if the water is really highly contaminated, there are some products that can get you results in a relatively short time frame. But if you're interested in, a 1 CFU per 100 mil type level, we haven't found anything that'll really come in reliably below 18 hours, except for that Fluidian, which does have a shorter time to result.
Are you planning to publish results with regard to these parameters as well?
Well, say the Fluidian report is online, and we look at the manufacturer claims, and they claim a certain time to result, so we check the results at those times and validate the manufacturer claims. Another question? Yes?
You mentioned at the beginning E. coli, but then you also showed the Delagua MF.
Yes.
Did you look at MLSP and fecal coliforms, and if so, did you see like what sort of correlation did you see?
We were using the lauryl sulfate broth for both the WagTech and the Delagua kit, so I know it's possible to use a E. coli specific media, like something that has a chromogen or a fluorogen in it, but that's not how they're most typically used, so we basically just use what was off the shelf for those ones.
Did you find these results discouraging, or would you say that you were encouraged by kind of the availability of all the different methods? Like, what would you recommend for future developers?
Well, I think we were initially discouraged, especially by this smearing problem, because a lot of the samples were unusable. And we thought, my gosh, is this happening a lot in the field? But then when we spoke with people and learned that they weren't actually coming across that problem, or maybe if you have come across smear colony problem, let me know. But it seemed that in practice that wasn't so much of a problem, so we felt a little bit reassured about that. We did find lower recovery when compared to standard methods for a lot of them, including the Delagua and WagTech kits, so that did concern us. But because we were following that strict protocol and we lost a lot of the samples due to smearing, I think it's hard to, we wouldn't walk away and say those kits are not, fit for purpose. Someone maybe should redo the analysis with a little bit less volume in the system. But we were quite, some of the analyses did really well in terms of linearity and reproducibility. So, and the good news is we assessed the kit that the JMP uses in household surveys, which is based on the compact dry E. coli only plate, and that did quite well. Whew. So we can continue to use that one. But there were other products that also did well. Good?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Notebooks here. Okay. Thanks so much to Rick and Aiden for your presentation so far. So my name's Camille Zimmer, and I'm from CAWST. I'm a knowledge and research advisor, and together with the WHO and UNICEF, we are co-badging a new document, which, as Rick introduced and Aidan introduced, is a guide to selecting field water quality testing equipment. So the purpose of the guide is, so I'll be talking about the guide's purpose, the scope, the links to the WHO small water system guidelines, and then also the content and structure of the new equipment guideline. So the purpose of the document is to help practitioners, as we saw with the activity earlier, there's many different considerations to take into account when we pick water quality testing equipment, and I think everybody in this room has had that experience with trying to select methods. So really it's intended as a useful guide, and the scope includes microbiological parameter of E. coli or thermal tolerant coliforms, and then as well parameters to look at microbial safety of turbidity and free chlorine residual and pH. And then per this year's guidelines from the WHO on small water systems, we have 5 priority chemical contaminants of arsenic, fluoride, lead, manganese, and nitrate. So we cover those, and of course there are, why I focus on, so of course there are more, there's so many contaminants that we could also test for, and it's very context specific, but these are what were identified as priorities in the small water systems guidelines, and we hope that in outlining the many different considerations and frameworks that go into testing field water quality equipment, that it will help organizations and practitioners to select their best equipment, even if they're not testing for one of these priority parameters. So, that is what I just said. So yeah, not all 9 parameters will be a priority everywhere, but we hope that the framework will be useful. So I will go over the content and structure of the document. The meat, what I like to call the meat and potatoes of the document, is chapters 3 till 5, which we look at, we outline criteria to consider when we're selecting equipment. So things that we went over in our Q&A earlier, which was great feedback from the audience. I was very relieved to find that nobody shouted something that we didn't think of, which was good. And then chapters 4 and 5 really get into what equipment is available for testing microbiological and chemical and physical parameters. So I'll go over the main categories that we cover in chapter 3. So these are things that would need to be considered, or that could be considered when selecting field testing equipment. So as we heard before, and was mentioned in the presentation before this, our first things like ability to meet testing requirements. So does it test the same parameters that you're looking for? Has the performance been validated? Does it cover the lower limit of detection if you're trying to measure 1 CFU per 100 milliliters? And for example, category 5, transport and storage considerations. Do you need a cold chain to keep your media cold? How long is the shelf life of some of your reagents? Will you be able to use them in that time? And then, of course, things like supply chain, which was also mentioned a lot, and I think we've all had struggles with the supply chain, especially post-COVID. So just to kind of demonstrate our thinking on some of these categories. So for example, ease of use. We identified 6 criteria within this category. So things like training required for testing. This goes into I think somebody mentioned in the Menti turnover of personnel. Is it easy to use? Calibration and maintenance needs, which also you might need a personnel for that as well. processing time, there was a question earlier on time to result. So both incubation time and also the time required in the field to actually process the sample. Things like safe handling requirements. Does the test equipment involve any kind of hazardous materials? For example, arsenic testing equipment, most of the field tests generate waste that has mercury in it, which of course goes into number 6, which is waste disposal requirements. So I think somebody mentioned in the session before about disposing of waste, and that can be really challenging, particularly with hazardous or biohazardous waste. So these are just some examples of the criteria that we go into here that might not need to be taken into account everywhere, but should be kept in mind when selecting a method. So as far as chapter 4, so we give an overview of what we call the big 3. So presence absence testing, most probable number testing, and colony counting, which includes membrane filtration and some of the gel-based methods that Rick mentioned. We give strengths and limitations of each method, as well as some typical use cases for each approach. So, for example, if you need a quantitative result, then you are not going to use presence absence testing. If you have a very turbid water, then you might not be able to do membrane filtration because the filter will get clogged. Things like that. Yeah, so going from microbiological testing into chapter 5, so we look at chemical and physical testing equipment, which has way more options to cover. So yeah, we go over analytical approaches to test for pH, chlorine, turbidity, fluoride, arsenic, lead, magnesium, or manganese, and nitrate. So for example, things like visual observation, colorimetric, like pool testers or a turbidity tube, or digital methods that rely on a color change, and things like electrochemical methods like a probe. And then we also, in the annex, which we hope will be useful, we've gathered case studies from practitioners around the world who explain why they picked what they are using and their experiences with it. So we hope that that's instructional so that users of the document can help or can see what the thought process was to select their equipment. Yeah, so what's next? The test equipment selection guideline will be released in the first half of 2025. So we are currently addressing the huge number of amazing peer reviewers' comments that we got back from this document over the summer. We're doing the final peer review, and yeah, we're excited to release it in the first half of 2025. Thank you, and I have just a couple minutes for questions. Anybody wants one? Yeah.
So I saw the parameters to verify the chemical contaminants.
Yeah.
I noticed there's no PFAS in there, given that the maximum contamination limit for PFAS is at least 1,000 times less than the ones you have mentioned in there.
Yeah.
So given the increased concern of PFAS around the globe, I was wondering why it was not there.
That's a great question. Yeah, PFAS is an emerging contaminant of concern, and the detection limit, sorry, the safe limit is very, very low and hasn't been established with a lot of species of PFAS. So it's difficult to, I'm not aware even of a field test for PFAS at all. So it's not in the scope of the document because there aren't any methods to test for PFAS in the field. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Just wondering on the criteria side, whether affordability should be a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely, it's part of that. Yeah.
Just thinking about consumables.
Yeah.
Whether, because in the end, even though the practitioners are the ones who are working, purchasing, and bringing this, but in the end, it ends up going to the community or the community groups that takes over, but then the consumable localization can become an issue.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we balance that? So just wondering if that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, definitely. We outline cost as a consideration, and thank you for bringing it up because there's just so many parameters. It slipped my mind to bring it up, but for example, with chemical water quality testing, if you're using an electrochemical probe, then you don't have any reagents to keep purchasing. So that might be great if you have startup, like a grant or something like that, that you want to use to purchase equipment for a lab, and then you don't have much O&M funding ongoing. So that might be a really good option. But if you have ongoing funding and you don't have as much startup funding, maybe some kind of a more affordable digital colorimeter that requires purchase of reagents ongoing might be an option, or depending on what kind of sensitivity you need, like a pool tester or something like that, if you're just doing kind of rough estimates. Yeah.
So my work is with community samplers and citizen scientists. I just wondered if your sort of document was able to highlight if any of the field tests would be appropriate for such uses, or if it's just sort of best to look through based on cost and usability, or if you were able to specify any that could be sort of public use.
I missed who you were with, sorry.
Sorry, I'm at the University of Leeds, but my work focuses on community samplers and citizen scientists.
Like citizen science.
So it was just like whether the document was able to highlight usability for that context, or whether it was sort of implied by.
We didn't focus exactly on citizen science, but we do outline who will be doing the testing, and that would include citizen science, and the degree of training that might be required. So it's definitely a consideration. Yeah, I have time for just one more question, or you can confine me after. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to jump on this, Frederick Conway in Uganda, who were involved in water kit selection kind of on behalf of local government, which are then the one using, but are not really involved in the decision process, which is done by NGOs on behalf of local government. So I just want to point that out because I guess having a kind of guidance on who should be involved in this thinking process through these criteria.
Yeah, thank you. Great, okay. Yeah, I love the questions. If we have more time at the end, I would love to have more because I love getting questions. Okay, so I mentioned earlier in my presentation, so you won't be listening to me talk for the entire time, right now. We have an annex at the end of the document that has some case studies from practitioners who have selected field water quality testing equipment for their local context and shared why they selected what they selected and their experiences with it. So first off, I'd like to share the experiences of Elijah, who is with Seeds of Hope Partnerships in Zambia, and he is one of CAWST's training partners, and I asked him to chat with me about why he selected, or why Seeds of Hope selected the WagTech kit, which was they purchased it before 2010, so they've had it for a very long time, and just what their experiences have been with it. Oh, sorry. Can I bring this video up? Sorry, I've got to drag it over. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and then we can show it afterwards.
Yeah. actually, you know what I think I'm gonna do, because I have the audio here.
Okay.
The problem is I'm having difficulty dragging it onto this screen. So, yeah, I don't have his video. What's that?
I'm not responsible for this, but I have been. I have before.
I dragged
throughout this
something onto the
week.
other
Yes.
screen. Okay.
So it might be that this is still being shared, so I'm gonna. And then is he here?
Yeah, it's right there.
Got this. Okay.
Yeah. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, no problem.
Yay, okay, I'm so glad you can see his video, because he just he just took his time to share his experiences with us, and I'm so glad that this is working, because I don't want to talk for somebody.
Throughout its operation, has mainly operated as a project lab. We've tried to semi-commercialize it, but that hasn't been fully implemented. So in responding to the question that you've asked, yes, there've been some form of routine testing, but mostly it was to test the effectiveness of the biosand filter in relation to other technologies that we've been promoting. So in our work, our number one implementation when it comes to household water treatment and safe storage is the implementation of the biosand filter. We have also used the equipment in educating different stakeholders, capacity developing their skills in water quality testing. So we do not only use the equipment for the implementation of Seeds of Hope, but in partnership with CAWST or collaboration over the years, we have used the same equipment to train people, like I've said, in introduction to drinking water quality testing, and many others. Yes, I think one of the reasons probably why we went for WorkTech was based on what we're trying to achieve, our objectives for setting up a project lab, but also I think it was cost effective, and we could rely on the results that we are able to get from the WorkTech. And if we compare the WorkTech with the other models which are there, I think the WorkTech has been one of the outstanding portable test kits, and it does a lot of things. And you will find that it's very easy to understand, and once you use that test kit, it's very easy to use these other portable test kits.
Yeah, so that was from our partner Elijah, talking about what kind of equipment, like his selection, or the Seeds of Hope selection of the WAG test kit, WAG Tech kit for testing water quality. And yeah, so he shared with me during our conversation the fact that they use the WAG Tech kit for many different parameters. So they don't only do microbiological testing, they also look for conductivity, pH, ammonia levels, fluoride, nitrate, and nitrate. So that was why one of the reasons why the WAG Tech kit was appropriate for them and worked for them. And then as well, the fact that the kit, so this was like the old school WAG Tech kit that came in like a metal container. And it's super robust, and they've checked it on an airplane multiple times and it still works, which is amazing. And then, yeah, I think something else that Elijah highlighted during our conversation was the fact that they can get the broth, the M-lauryl sulfate broth in country. So they have supply chain in Zambia to order the broth. So that was another consideration for them, yeah, with the kit. I was also hoping to share the experiences of another one of our partners, Lalit, but I think in the consideration for time, I won't show the video. I will just quickly run through his fluoride testing, because his approach was very strategic and innovative, in that they were mapping fluoride contamination of water sources and households in rural India, and they were screening the water samples using a field color comparator, so a reagent that turns added to water to turn color, compared visually. So they were identifying water sources that would need to be followed up with further testing, which they did in a semi-decentralized lab with an ion electrode. And this way they tested, it was something like only a quarter of the samples that they would have otherwise had to test, and saved so many resources, so that they could test in more communities. And as well, with the color comparator, they worked with households to sensitize families to the hazard of fluoride contamination in drinking water. So they just took this really amazing approach to screen samples with a low-cost field method, and then take the samples back to a semi-decentralized lab with the ion electrode probe. So it's a really nice case study there. And thank you so much. Any questions on the case studies? Do we have like just 2 minutes before I move on? No? Okay, we can see them for later. Yeah, so with the last couple minutes here, what I would like to do is point our group here towards the open access resources that CAWST has online to complement this field test equipment selection guide. So the selection guide doesn't go into super in-depth on each test method, because one of the reasons for this is that CAWST does have a big library on each of these parameters to test for them. So we have things like, I brought them, anything, yeah, so we have things like technical briefs, oh my God. Technical briefs, so things like general aspects of drinking water quality, so just an introduction to the background of water quality. We have a specific guideline into how to test for microbiological aspects of drinking water. Same thing for chemical aspects of drinking water. Anything for acceptability, so things like turbidity and salinity, that is an acceptability. We categorized it under acceptability. And then things like product sheets. So if after reading the test guide, you want to learn more about a colorimeter, we make product sheets to outline, for example, the HAC DR900 colorimeter. And we also have fact sheets. For example, if you were learning more on manganese and wanted to learn more about manganese contamination, we have a fact sheet on manganese. There are, a huge open access library, and they're all free of charge. And our team we have consulting support to answer questions if there's anything that's unclear about the resources or about testing, water quality testing. Yeah, we also have learning modules. So if you were trying to learn how to test for turbidity, we have a learning module that goes through, for example, how to use a turbidity tube. Yeah, so with that, so for example, as I said, if you were wanting to learn about water quality in general, we have a resource for that. So I will, well, this is my example too, sneak peek. So we have an online collection for that. So it's at washresources.com, and you would navigate home, and we can search in here for like water quality testing. And there are, aspects of drinking water quality, on iron, on even sampling with a Whirlpack bag. There's so many things on here that you can explore. So if you're wanting to learn about water quality in general, it's a great place to start. We have a collection on just learn about drinking water quality testing that pulls together all these resources, because I know it's a lot of resources. So if we have things like collections to kind of pull together all that knowledge to make it easier to navigate. For example, scenario 2, as I mentioned, if you want to learn how to use a turbidity tube, which is a really great low-cost way to visually measure turbidity in the field, we have a little tutorial online that gives feedback on how to read a turbidity tube. So for example, it says to click and drag the blue arrow until you can just barely see the X, and then you can learn how to read the turbidity. And I think it's gonna lag because this computer is also doing Zoom at the same time. But basically what happens is the little picture on the right becomes obscured when it's too turbid, and so you pick the one just below that to when you can just barely see the X, and that's your turbidity. And the answer to this one is 20 NTU. You would kind of like use this little scrolly thing. Oh, here it is. So until you get to 20, kind of giving the demo of filling this tube with water until you can just barely see that X. And we have a couple different scenarios of this to learn how to do a few different types of water quality. Or for example, if you want to try an MPN technique but don't know where to start, we have a video on most probable on MPN. So we have a little MPN demo, which I will not play because we've watched a lot of videos, but So, that's a little run through. If more learning is needed past the guideline document, which just briefly goes over each testing technique, then the CAWST learning resources are out there for that. And we are also happy to answer questions. Speaking of questions, all three of us, Aiden, Rick, and I, are happy to take, we have 3 minutes. And I know we're all hungry, so yeah, at the back.
Hi, I'm Sabina from UNICEF. I was thinking when you said the criteria for measuring the microbial different kids, are you also considering the baseline characteristics of the water? Because I'm just thinking my experience in Nepal, we used the dry compactors to condense it with a pellet pretty fun experience. I had experience on the level of iron between the
color.
Because are we considering how much turbidity the water is? Because I'm thinking also after monsoon or after flooding, there's a lot of turbidity in the water, a lot of iron content, and how that would interfere with the reading of the results of the E. So are we also considering the criteria of the baseline characteristics of the water that we're testing to select all these?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So the question was whether or not we consider, we went into considerations of background water quality, for example, high turbidity and high iron. And we went into that because that's a big consideration. If you have high turbidity sample, you will likely not be able to do membrane filtration of any significant volume of water because the filter will clog. And also the color can obscure the colonies when you're reading them for some media. So absolutely. And we, so we do give the guidance, like if that's a concern, then maybe you go to MPN or other, like, for example, gel-based methods, which might not be so obscured. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for this great session and the session before. My name is Jeff, I'm with the Quiet Institute and the Real Water Program. I wanted to just raise the question of cost again. I mean, there have been some discussions on cost.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to draw the room's attention to some work that was published recently in Environmental Science and Technology and Analysis of the cost of testing under different testing modalities. Connecting with existing labs versus field testing.
Yeah.
And that was a very careful analysis, and I think it's important as we're talking about field kits
Absolutely.
to be emphasizing the very particular rural settings in which test kits are more cost effective than labs. And that analysis is a really useful one. It's got kind of a decision tree that takes you to where it's a very clear cost effectiveness case for test kits as opposed to labs, but they're very particular in terms of dispersion of communities, of the difficulty of fuel costs, etc. So we should chat afterwards about getting that into some of the cost details.
Absolutely, and I saw that paper and I was like, yes, this is like, this is great. Because it's so true. Like, for example, with our case study with Lalit, they were transporting some samples back to their semi-decentralized lab for that selective ion probe. And so definitely there's so many different contexts. Like when you say field, it kind of conjures a certain image, but in many cases there's semi-decentralized labs or mobile labs, or just like so many different approaches. Absolutely. Yeah. That is our time. So if you have any more questions, feel free to come back to us. But yeah, thank you everybody.
Thank you.